Hello, my name is Susan Inches, and I'm here to talk to you for a few minutes about my book, Advocating for the Environment, How to Gather Your Power and Take Action. And first, a shout out to Boulder Books for putting together a list of questions for me to answer so that you can learn about my book. So I'll just jump right in. The first question is, what inspired you to write this book? Well, what I saw was that there are many, many books on our environmental problems, about everything that we're doing wrong. But what I saw was that there was very little written at all on what ordinary citizens can do to impact environmental policy. So that was my reason for writing the book. And not only that, I see citizen action as being so important because right now, a lot of our environmental policy is being written by corporate lobbyists. And we need to balance that off and present the voices of citizens to our decision makers. So that's why I was inspired to write this book. I saw a real need for it. The second question is, what kind of research did you do in writing the book? Well, first I want to tell you that I've been in public policy myself as a professional and a volunteer for 20 years. And so a lot of my book is based on personal stories, what works and what doesn't. I've seen it firsthand and I've written about that. But then in addition to that, I included some stories about other people who've taken action for the environment, people like those down in Cancer Alley in Louisiana who've stood up to petrochemical and plastics manufacturers saying no to toxic emissions in those areas. So the research I did was really stories from other people about environmental action and what's worked for them. So the next question is, what is one way we must think differently in order to enact environmental change? Well, first of all, let me tell you that my book is organized in two parts. And part one is called Learn to Think Differently. And it's all about how we need to change how we view ourselves and the earth in order to have a healthy and sustainable future. Part two is called Gather Your Power and Take Action. And this part is really a guidebook. It's all about how to understand power, how to work with decision makers, how to work with the media, how to communicate effectively, and so on. So the second half of the book is really just perfect for people who are organizers. The first half of the book is for everyone. It's all about how we need to change how we see ourselves in order to have a healthy future. So the question, of course, was what's one way we must think differently? And I guess what I would say to that is maybe we need to think differently about our corporations because we have allowed corporations to make as much profit as they want and not clean up after themselves. So in other words, corporations will make their product, do what they do, and then it's left to taxpayers to clean up after them. Well, I think that's not the right way to be thinking about this. I think corporations should be good citizens, and many of them are, but many of them aren't. So I think we need to think differently about that and say, yes, it's a good thing that corporations provide goods and services, but they also need to be responsible to the earth and to the rest of us and clean up after themselves. So that's one way to think differently that I talk about a little bit in the book and I feel strongly about. So the next question is one that I get very often when I do author talks. And the question is, how do you talk to people who have opposing views on climate change? And I have a whole program, an hour's worth of program on this. But the quick answer is to speak to people's personal experience. So, for example, sportsmen who are hunters and fishermen, they tend to have more conservative political views, and yet they are very much watching the environment. And so to talk to a sportsman about climate change, you might say, what have you seen? Is the environment changing in your experience, and how is it changing? What are you seeing out there? Are you seeing that the lakes are melting 2 weeks earlier than they used to? Are you seeing that there are fewer young fish in the river? Are the forests changing? And by speaking about personal experience, basically you can cut through any kind of political ideology, any kind of resistance, and just have a conversation about what they've observed. And then you might even say, and why do you think those changes are happening? So that's the way in, is to speak to personal experiences and talk about human stories, which really advocacy is all about human stories. And certainly talking to people with opposing views is about that as well. So the next question is, what's a simple action that everyone can do to help the environment? Well, one of the things I talk about in my book a lot is people's personal stories, as I just said. And so one simple thing you can do is to contact a decision maker, whether that's your city councilor, could be a county commissioner, could be a state legislator, maybe even Congress. But what they need to hear is your personal story. What is it you care about? And so that's one simple thing you can do, is you can send an email or a quick note written down in the mail saying, I care about the environment and here's why. And believe it or not, that is very powerful. In fact, one of the legislators I work with said to me recently, he said, when I go to vote on an issue, what I remember are the stories I heard. So yes, there are all kinds of facts and figures and data out there, but it's the human stories that really have an impact. And that's where citizens can really impact public policy. So the next question is, what have you been reading to help you feel hopeful? And I'll just quickly point to 3 books here. One is called Choosing Earth by Duane Elgin. And I really like this book because he talks about a great transition to a mature civilization. His theory being that we're in an adolescent phase as humanity, and that he sees the possibility of us maturing to a place where we treat each other and we treat the earth with much greater respect. And of course, that's right where my heart is. So I was very inspired by that book. Another is Rooted and Rising. This is called Rooting and Rising, Voices of Courage in a Time of Climate Crisis. This is all essays by people of faith, rabbis, Greek Orthodox, Native American, a wide range of people who are environmental activists because of and based on their faith. So it's a bit of a maybe intellectual book, but I really loved it. I loved hearing from these people and why they're taking action. And then finally is this book here, All We Can Save. This is a best-selling book. It is Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. Very solutions-oriented and a lot of very interesting voices. There are essays, poems, and stories in this book, and I found that it's a kind of book that I want to keep on my bedside table and just read a little portion of it before I go to sleep. So those 3 books have been helping me to stay energized about environmental work during this time. So let's see, is there anything else you want us to know about this book? Great question. One of the things that I like to talk about is how advocacy is kind of a big scary word for a lot of people. And really what it boils down to, as I've been saying, is citizens, ordinary citizens telling their human stories. It does not have to be intimidating. You don't have to be an expert. I mean, it's wonderful if you have facts and data to share, but really what I'm talking about is connecting with decision makers and telling them what you care about. It's as simple as that. It's about building relationships, being in relationship with decision makers and telling them what you care about. So that's what I like to convey in the book. And what's really one thing that's important to leave you with is that this is about all of us. If we're going to actually address climate change and create a healthy future for our children, we need to tell our stories, our human stories, to those people who are making decisions. And it's quite simple. And my book goes into this in a lot of detail about how you and how we can all actually make a difference in environmental policy. And then finally, the bookstore has asked me to read a quick section from my book. And so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to read actually the very first chapter, a short paragraph from that. So here we go. Advocacy starts with your story. Your story, my story, and everyone else's stories add up to the big story we're telling ourselves about the earth. Over time, our collective stories will guide us to sustainable prosperity and well-being or to total destruction. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with your personal story about the earth that you live on. What events have touched your heart? Was it a brilliant sunset over the ocean? The birth of an animal or child? Do you have a favorite place outdoors? Where do you spend your free time? Is there a place in nature where you go to connect with your soul? Have you felt the loss of a favorite place, or the loss of something you love to do, like swimming in a lake that's now too polluted for swimming, or the loss of something that sustained you, like fishing for a living? Your personal story about connecting with the earth, whether that story is about love or loss, is the starting place for advocacy. You may think stories are too touchy-feely, less important than facts, or weaker than your carefully crafted argument about your issue. This chapter will show you the opposite is true. It will show you how a well-crafted story is one of the most powerful tools in the advocate's toolbox. Let's start with my story. There was a 60-acre farm in the back of my house where I loved to play as a child. There were woods filled with giant oaks, fields of hay, and a tiny pond with a stream that ran in at one end and out at the other. We named the stream Rushing Water Brook and made T-shirts with the name written on them with magic markers. It was a child's paradise. My best friend Faith and I played there every afternoon after school. One day when I was about 10, Faith and I went out to play and found the once clear stream had turned a menacing shade of opaque milky orange. You could no longer see the bottom of the foot-deep stream. The pond had a plume of ugly orange where the stream flowed in. Just up the hill from the pond was a construction site. An enormous 6-story building was being constructed on one of the farm fields, and the stream was polluted by the construction. My friend and I felt betrayal, anger, and sadness. We were horrified. How could the grown-ups do something so destructive? Would there be any fish left in our little pond this summer? Would everything we loved about our playing place be destroyed? We were scared and outraged. We told our parents. They gave no answers. And it just got worse. The pond we loved was turned into a swimming pool with a bright turquoise bottom. The stream was bulldozed into an unnatural ditch beside the pool. The frogs we used to scare disappeared. We stopped playing there. This experience left me with an indelible memory and a powerful story about the careless pursuit of human goals. It stole my innocence. I'd seen firsthand how carelessness can kill wildlife and exterminate the beauty and bounty of nature. In my parents' lack of response, I could also see that people allowed this without fighting back. What is your story? How might it connect with your views of the earth today? Your authentic story that shares the details of your human experience, complete with feelings, thoughts, sights, sounds, and dialogue, can touch the heart of a decision maker and be a powerful influence. So thank you for sharing this time with me, and thank you again to Boulder Books for allowing me to answer a few author questions. And I hope you'll take interest in my book, Advocating for the Environment. And I wish you well and happiness on your journey. Thank you.